futuristic, strategic, individualization, activator, and maximizer. My name is Estrella Parker, and I am currently the Chief People Officer for Cupertino Electric Incorporated. The biggest aha for my top five strengths is it's one of those moments where you feel like not only are you feeling seen, but you also see yourself and begin to understand this is why I love certain things so much. This is why I get in the flow when. And it's actually really why I enjoy this position.
I'm Darren Verasami,
I'm Brandon Miller,
and this is the Strengths Whisperer.
the show empowering leaders to create, build, and sustain great places to work.
On this episode, we have Estrella Parker, the Chief People Officer at Cupertino Electric. Welcome to the show, Estrella.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
So, Estrella, I have your top five as futuristic, strategic, individualization, activator, maximizer. And because we see all 34 strengths, I'll even round out ideation, learner, woo, self-assurance, arranger. Those are your top 10. Gallup calls those your collection of your most dominant strengths. And out of maybe the top five, which one resonated with you the most?
It's really interesting because I think that the basket of the top five felt right for me. But probably if you had to make me choose which resonated the most, it would be strategic. Even though futuristic was the number one, I think the most applied strength I have throughout my life really is strategic. And so that's the one that resonated the most.
Awesome. I love diving into strategic. We had on a wonderful string of high strategic leaders. And so we're getting to talk often about this particular strength. If you had to rank a number two, I'm curious what you would pick for that one.
I would pick probably individualization because I've been around a long time now in terms of leadership role and leadership careers. And the one thing that I've learned is that it's really important to understand the uniqueness of every individual and being able to unlock that and know that and dance with everyone's uniqueness is very important. It's a key to creating a vibrant kind of work environment, a vibrant interaction between leaders and the people they work with.
I love the combination of those two strengths. The intuition that's connected to strategic is often something that when people hear it or see it on their list, they jump to the idea that they are strategic as the dictionary defines the ability to build a strategy and think high level and plan with contingencies. And a deeper dive into the strength reveals that it's actually more nuanced than that. It actually reveals a level of intuition and thoughtfulness and a speed to react, a speed to change, a speed to move. So a great question I love to ask high strategics. So Estrella, if you were presented with a challenge and someone says to you, Estrella, it just can't be done. How does that land for you?
It's interesting because I've heard that many, many, many times like, in my career and my life. And I know now that my initial reaction is actually to be challenged to find a way. And especially if what you're aspiring to do is really important and game changing and impactful. So I've always felt that it was important, first of all, to try, that even if you tried and didn't succeed, you would still advance. So that is typically how I react. And yet, there were moments where I really got to understand that it's just not possible. But if I were presented with something, I would need to unpack it first. And knowing that the way I'm unpacking is to understand how I could move forward.
I think what's fascinating, Estrella, in just hearing that and just knowing a little bit of your backstory, you started off in computer science, right? And over the course of time, being in a very technical field like that, it's moved you very much in the direction of solving problems, but it's taking you right back to the people side. So when you shared that you're number two, with strategic was probably individualization, that this fascinating intuitiveness that Brandon talked about and that you've shared that comes from strategic, coupled with this powerhouse of individualization, being able to see people, what makes them tick, what drives them, and how that goes together. It becomes a really fascinating framework for actually solving problems and moving organizations forward with a foundation in your own training of a technical framework. Is that fair to say that that's been part of your journey and that that's how the dots have connected?
Yeah, I think part of why I started in the technical field was exactly because of the strengths around futuristic and strategic. When I got into the world of computers and technology, I understood that that was where the future was going to be. And so I was interested in learning about that and studying that. And it's funny how things evolve. I didn't choose to be in human resources, I didn't choose to be in human capital management. My career evolved here because people saw
Mm.
that. My mentors saw it. People I worked with saw that. And somehow I just gravitated to be invited into responsibilities and roles that had more and more draw into this side of the work. And it probably is because of that. I do feel like I lean in a lot on being strategic and thinking through what needs to be done. But we all know that many great things are done not by one person, but by a team, by a community, by an organization. And so the work of understanding people and helping people align and come together to achieve things is important. And I think I've just gravitated to that. I don't know if it's a strength or an interest. Maybe it's a combination of both. I was very interested in that. I was very interested in achieving things and moving ahead in the future. And so I got very interested in people.
People are the future, right? They're the lifeblood of many organizations. Technology is such a critical piece of that puzzle, but how we manage, how we grow our people, becoming that truly people first leader that you've evolved into is at the core of our future, of where we're headed. So, no, thanks for sharing that.
Well, even if you think about technology, it's like, why do we have technology? It is for people and societies, right? And so some people may say, what's chicken and the
Mm.
egg? But to me, the chicken is really people.
One of the gifts associated with individualization is that ability to spot and see strengths in others, to see what it is that makes them unique, and to attempt to position them to really thrive in a role, to be aligned with a purpose. And something you mentioned about your strengths, you said you started to learn what you loved and where you got into flow. And I'm curious, with that particular strength of individualization, how that connects now to being a people officer and training others who lead people to think about, how do we position our organization? How do we position people to be in roles that really fit who they are and where they're going to do their best?
I think it's generally a mindset. To be honest with you, the first time I heard about strength finders years and years ago, I really loved it because I love that concept. And maybe it ties to my own strength around strategic and being a maximizer,
Mhm.
because those two concepts align very well with strength finding. And so how I've leveraged, my understanding of it and my knowledge of it is really applying that kind of tone
Mm.
in a lot of our people processes. I believe in appreciating and investing more in what's good and what's positive, and letting that be the draw to improving the areas that need to be improved. For instance, as an example, one of the things that we normally do and look at in the world of human capital management are employee surveys, satisfaction surveys, engagement surveys, and that kind of thing. We usually get results right? Like, and managers, being critical thinkers, always gravitate to the things that have to be improved. And I always, when I guide people through that analysis, I tell them put two-thirds, at least two-thirds of your efforts on doubling down on what's good and what's right, and about a third in considering the improvement, and never pick more than one. So I would apply the same thing to people. It's kind of like, hey, double down on what you're good at. Find the places that you can show it off. Find the places that you can continue to nurture that strength of yours. But it's also good to work on something that might not be a strength, because it helps you advance. So definitely understanding the strength as kind of the foundation for how one grows, whether it's an individual or a group or an organization, is an important concept.
You mentioned you've been in organizations where you've taken employee satisfaction, kind of starting to look at engagement in these pieces. Can you share any correlation from your perspective as a chief people officer between strengths and satisfaction and engagement? How does it serve this notion of being engaged for employees?
I tell people I consume a lot of research and I consume a lot of studies, but I really am a field worker and I apply things. And what I know from when I apply this kind of research is that I get to the results faster, I get more effective. As an example, like I told you, when we guided our organizations to focusing on what's good and what's right and leveraging that, we got improvements in our engagement faster. And when you also develop a person and develop an individual plan, when you focus on their strength, they are able to also grow faster. And I also know of instances where there really wasn't a fit for a person with what their strengths were or what they were really good at, and sometimes career or the jobs that they have. And getting them to understand that, to me, is also faster for them to get on a path that makes them happier. So it might be tough in the beginning, but it gets them there faster. So they can find their flow.
That's really helpful. And I so appreciate that you mentioned the critical role of management when it comes to interpreting engagement. We too have interpreted thousands of report with managers, and it is more rare for a manager to see what's right than to dive right into what's wrong. The gentle nudging toward, okay, but if we do that, then you're just going to constantly feel like you're digging a hole back in. Because if we look at what you're doing well, and I love how you said double down on where you have success, because that's probably the best part of your manager job, because that's where you said that, we echo that term flow. That's where you're in your zone. And it's very rare to find a manager that's aces all across the board. Very rare that a person's going to hit all points. So that's critical. But the second piece I really appreciate that you brought out, and sometimes in the strengths movement, this gets a poor grade. And what it is this idea that we ignore the things that get in the way. And I think we both agree you can't do that because sometimes that third that's in the way really is in the way. It really needs to be propped up. What example we deal with, we do a work in the public sector and we meet managers who really struggle with giving recognition, appreciating, showing that gratitude and encouragement. And we let them know it's okay that we acknowledge that that's not a natural for you, but we can't leave it. We got to find a way to prop that up. We got to do something that helps you to at least become competent, because that's a gap we can't leave. And I imagine in your world, there's probably that reality that you're helping them double down on where they're strong, but then you're creating plans to help them shore up where it's critical work, things that they can't let go.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I would frame it as, yeah, you have to work on some of these things that are obvious that need to be improved. But the thing that you have to mind is whatever you come up with, it can't lower the areas that you're good at.
Mm,
It's also like trying to balance your attention because you may work so hard on that thing that you have to improve that you lose sight of the things that is already working for you. And so you kind of have to figure out, okay, I have to work on this, but I can't let go of this. And in fact, in order for that not to be affected, you should double
yeah.
down. The other thing about that is that, again, this gets to some of my maximizer.
I love that you keep calling it out. You're talking to two number one maximizers,
Yep.
and we're both like, say it again, say it again.
So, well, 1 ounce of investment in your strength will result in much more than 10 ounces of investment in an area that is difficult for you. So, if you only had 20 ounces of effort or whatever to invest, how do you optimize that and maximize that? So, put more and or balance it so that you're not letting go of the strength aspect.
You know, in light of what you just said, Astray, I just really want to repeat that for the listeners and break that down. Our muscles can atrophy. That's really what it comes down to. And the areas where we're strong, and this is a common trend in many organizations. This might sound familiar to some of you as listeners here, where organizations have gotten really good at something, doing something. They jump on to the next thing and they let go of what's done that's driven them and actually became a catalyst as a driver. We've seen that numerous times in our engagement surveys that we end up conducting with some of our clients, right, Brandon? So we go through, and one things we remind them is, okay, here's one of your indicators that you did really well on. Maybe you did really good on setting clear expectations for people. It's easy to say, we're doing great at setting expectations. We're going to focus all on recognition. And those same managers that were doing great at setting clear expectations move over, put all their focus into recognizing people. But now people are confused because they're not getting the clear expectations that they once were getting because they've completely pivoted and that muscle atrophies. And then next year we're measuring engagement. Recognition is shifted, but they're unclear on, well, what the heck am I supposed to do in
Right.
my role? We can't let those muscles atrophy at all. I think that's really powerful and important.
Yeah, I love your analogy because our human bodies are a system.
Mhm.
And so you can't let one aspect atrophy. The whole system has to be healthy. And so when one area is strong, you have to always think about how you keep it there and figure out ways to increase the level of health in the other areas.
I want to help some of our listeners hearing this today echo a couple points, and then I want to ask you to take us up level because you're doing a really good job in the aggregate of those managers who, can play. But I want to say this for our dear listeners: 1 ounce invested in area of strength can give you a 10 ounce return. 10 ounces in a non-strength can give you a 1 ounce return. And sometimes that's so important to remember that it just comes down to the aggregate of time. And it is the great equalizer of all of us. We all get the same amount, and you only get so much in your work week. And it just becomes a matter of where you focus to get that great return. And so, if you heard what Darren said about you're great at setting expectations, but you got to work on another area, don't let go where you're strong. That's what's keeping you probably in a place where your people can still connect and engage. Devote some resources to tools, resources, reminders, use tech, use places, but don't get caught there. And so, Estrella, I want to ask this from the chief people level. When we talked, you gave some kind of head count, but Cupertino has a macro population. We're not talking a company with 100 folks. We're talking 4,000 people. You probably have a pretty large contingent of middle managers, and then your up directors, leaders, however that's all described. How do you keep the message on repeat?
Yeah, well, I was pretty lucky and happening on this organization because they are making my job easy. I would say that it really started with the founders. The founders at Cupertino Electric started by building a people first organization. So I didn't really have the chance to meet the original founder. He unfortunately had just passed away as I started in the organization. So, first and foremost, it's an organization that has started with a core set of values on people. And so it's just people talk about it and they still talk about the stories of Gene Revisa when he's like walking people around and mentoring leaders, how he talks about what business are we in? And if they answer, we're in the electrical construction business, he goes, no, that just happens to be what we do. We are in the people business. And so it's very ingrained in our organization, which is a great platform for me to help the organization. Because really, my challenge right now in the organization, if they have grown, and especially in the last 10 years, is when they had that high growth curve. And so, my challenge in this organization right now is more like creating systemic solutions to make sure that that strength continues to exist and prevail. And so to answer your question, it's basically already like culturally a bias in the organization. And my job right now is to develop kind of the processes and the systems and the programs that sustain it or enable it for a large organization. Because many of our current systems are still built from when they were smaller. And so it's really about how do we think about that as we recruit, as we onboard, as we train managers, what it means to be a Cupertino Electric manager. We are talking right now, as an example, the skills for being a manager is kind of generic. Every organization will want the same kinds of competencies and skills. But what's important for us to teach is this the mindset that makes Cupertino Electric leaders a unique kind of leader, one who is people first. So those are some of the things we're doing. And that would be specific to this situation. You know, I've had different organizations I've been with where the challenges may have been different.
Estrella, I want to follow that up with just a simple question. You talked about the founders made it easy. You're in the people business. How critical are stories to your culture? We're talking about the stories of not only the founders, but of people's experiences that they share that get passed on generationally.
Absolutely critical. And it's something I learned probably in the last decade how important that is. I think a pivotal moment for me was this was maybe almost 20 years ago when I was working at the Clorox company. That organization was a very analytical organization culturally. Everything was very quantitative, very planful. Yet when we looked at our engagement data, we found that people were actually profile wise likely to get more engaged if you drew on what we call not the rational levers, but the ones that are more around the humanistic side, the recognition that it's not about the pay, it's not this. And that was the journey for me for learning and understanding strategically how human beings work and to not ignore that side of us that are emotional beings. And stories are a way to connect to people's emotions. You know, if I could lay out the same information, very data driven, the likelihood that someone will remember that, the lifespan of that is short. But if I laid it out in a story, they would remember that for a long time because it becomes an experience that is not only accepted in the head, but, in their being. And so they remember it. And the consistency of the themes of the story is what generates and creates a culture. So as we talk about our successes and we always talk about the team and the people and what they did, people begin to understand this is an organization that is about the people and what we do together, not about that, oh, we got this building done, you know,
Yep.
which we also tell in the story, but
Right.
who are we featuring?
That's right. It's the people, and there's a lot of data for our listeners that are data driven and that want some backing to that, that actually validate everything that Estrella just said, that stories and our ability to actually connect and remember are tied very deeply into our that emotional connection that keeps that momentum going forward. So there's a treasure trove of information out there. I'm reminded of Jim Quick's work, who has done a lot of work on brain research and whatnot. And that is actually how he gets people to trains the brain to remember words, connections with different things. Is he will say, if he gives you a block of words, here's how you remember it. And he creates a story and then he remembers all these key words. And it's that simple.
Mhm.
That's on a very micro level, but it's in our core being of how we are, who we are, and how we show up. So it completely ripples through culture.
The power of oral tradition, passing down stories from generation to generation, and how deeply embedded those can become to who we are, where we learn from. And so I so appreciate the origin story, the founders and their
Mhm.
values and the repetition of those values. You could not have said that better for our listeners today to understand whether your organization is macro, you have thousands of employees, or you're leading a team of 10, or you're leading a team of two. How you engage people around values and share the stories of what matters most. We remember what we hear the most. Repetition is always going to equal significance. And as we build on that, that's the seedbed of culture. How do we come back to value? So, Estrella, thank you so much. I did want to provide you an opportunity to ask us maybe something about strengths, maybe something about engagement, an area that you might be challenged. This is the Ask Us Anything portion of the show. Did you come today with anything that we might be able to support you with about strengths or otherwise?
Yeah, well, one of the things I was curious about, and unfortunately I couldn't find my old, like, this is probably the fifth time I'm taking it. And I know that certain things are there all the time, but I think the order might have changed for me over time. How does that work?
That's great. So anytime we take a psychometric assessment, we want to think in terms of part of this assessment is actual to who we are. And a great assessment is going to be 80% actual. Like we can say that's that's me all day. And 20% of any assessment is going to have some aspirational components to it. I want to be like this. I'm aspiring to this. And so the true metal of a test is called test retest reliability. So how many times can you retake it and have some consistency with the most prominent answers? And so Clifton Strengths actually scores pretty high. It's about 7 or 8 of the top 10 collect regularly in the top 10. And a way to think about that is those 7 or 8 strengths probably represent two kinds of strengths. One are your core strengths. So think of these as genetically coded. You didn't get a say. That person, and denying that person actually creates dissonance. So it's helpful. You said it right at the front end of your intro about finding why you love certain things, why these things get you in flow. And that's the core strength discovery. The second strength that you're going to see stay pretty tightly compacted in that top 10 are your growth strengths. So this is the influence of others. This is environmental influences, realities of trauma that affect who we are, or opportunities, successes, different pathways. And so if 7 or 8 collect, those are the ones that you probably could address. And sometimes we're asked, should I retake the assessment? And I like to answer, absolutely. This is anytime you do a psychometric assessment, it's an X-ray in time. It's that moment where you live, which strengths are the most resonant, and it gives you a really good insight into, okay, I see some consistency in my outcomes. But I will give you this caveat. Many of the strengths will move around a lot because those quote unquote strengths could be better described as learned behaviors. In learned behaviors, if I take you back to your university days, it was like
Mhm.
you had to learn math. You had to do the course. No matter what, you had to get through it. So in that season, you were locked in on math, and I got to know math. But for some of us, when the course was over, we were done. We're like, you can keep calculus for the rest of my life. If I never touch it, I'm happy. Those strengths that would associate could come way up to the top, and in another assessment, whoop, drop way back to the bottom because they're needed in time. And so that's a helpful way that some have learned to understand and unpack the test retest.
Right, right. Like I think individualization may have come up for me up the ranks over probably the last decade. I don't remember it being in my first five before, but it's something, as we talked about, I focus on and see value in.
The good news about growth strengths can happen our entire life. Our entire life, we can focus on something. This is the great news of research on brain plasticity. We used to think 30 years old, you're all done. That's the term, set in your ways. Like you're probably not going to change much. Well, we're learning, oh, actually, life can change you a lot. Things can happen and you can continue to advance, be better. And so some have reported something like that, like, wow, I just saw that one keep climbing. It feels deep now. It feels like it resonates.
One area, and maybe because you mentioned some of this around trauma and all of that, that I'd be really curious about is how have the body of work around strength helped advance DEI issues?
Yeah. I'll tell you what, Gallup has put significant effort around the reality of our core personality, our core talent as this assessment measures. So the areas of longing and belonging and where we find our draw to how we behave and think as such a differentiator into human experience. We're so unique. And then lifting from that outside of the core of our personality into then our experiences and our backgrounds and who we are. There's a lot of work now beginning to understand of how you can connect a movement and organization where we're very respectful of differences and a deep core we all align with. We all have talents. We all share, and then building up from that too, with this respect, with this appreciation of differences. Let's keep elevating this conversation to the other apparent differences we all share.
I think it's important because the way the instrument is done, I think all of the strengths are very much neutral, right? Neutral to race and all of that. But society puts values or valuation into certain things, like certain strengths are more important than others and this and that. And I think that I'm just curious about that and whether there's additional ways that that can be truly made pure in terms of looking at everyone's specific set of strengths as strengths.
Yeah,
That's the individualization in me
yeah,
talking.
you are not wrong, and I will tell you, here's a shared strength that is often highly prized: achiever. The most common strength in the world. 1/3 of people who take this assessment have achievers show up top five. So it's a prized strength. That most people are very happy when an achiever shows up on the scene because they have a lot of endurance. They work hard to get things done. And then one might find, oh my, achievers number 34 out of 34. So am now I lesser than my colleagues? Absolutely not. You still get things done. You still accomplish tasks. You'll have a different way you're going to go about that. And that's an advantage to us because maybe you're bringing empathy to our team. And we need to think about each other because otherwise we might work ourselves to death without anybody pausing long enough to go, Estrella, how are you today? How are you
Right.
feeling about what's happening? So that this we call these strengths biases, and like every other bias in
Hmm.
life, strengths biases are as real as all other types of cultural biases that we could pull out in the reality of people. And so this is a great point where I'm going to be happy to share some resources on this topic because Gallup has done a large body of work in the last 3 years of the connection with DEI and strengths and strongly embedded works around this that really stick because it's starting at base levels that we each have experiences and then we move up to where we don't each have experience. We have uniqueness as your individualization will see, right? With such variance in some of our other areas where we want to have diversity, equity, inclusion conversations. Estrella, if people wanted to get in touch with you or learn more about what you're up to, what your organization is doing, you've hit on such great points today that some might want to just ask, hey, share with me what's going on. Where will they find you and how best way to connect?
I think the best way to do that is via LinkedIn. So I'm at Estrella Parker.
Fantastic. And we will have that information in the show notes. For our listeners out there, are you ready to discover your strengths to accelerate into life like Estrella has? We believe in this path so much, we are offering our listeners the opportunity to discover their top 5 Clifton strengths. Email us at Brandon at 34strong.com. And that's Brandon, Brandon, at the number 34strong.com. Include in the subject line top 5 to request your StrengthsFinder code. We want to thank you for joining us on this episode of the Strengths Whisper. What's something that you took away from the conversation with Estrella? Share it with us. We'd love to know. Just email us at Brandon at 34strong.com. And remember, you can also request your top 5 strengths code there. Just include in that subject line, top 5. Thanks so much for joining us on the Strengths Whisper. We'll see you next time.